In This Week in Military History, we look back at the end of World War I to when the Allies and Germany signed the armistice, effectively bringing an end to World War I and its hostilities. World War I was thought to be the war to end all wars. The brutality of trench warfare turned what was thought to be a quick victory for the German people into a relentless grind that wreaked havoc across Europe and indeed the world. In April 1917, after Russia had left the war, the US declared war on Germany and American troops went into action. German soldiers, attempting to seize the initiative before the United States could land sufficient troops to make a difference in the war, launched an attack to push back Britain and her allies with a series of offensives. But on August 8th, the French and British armies launched the 100 Days Offensive, pushing the Germans themselves back. By the end of August, with the infusion of American troops and resources into the Western Front, there were over 1.4 million American soldiers in France, tipping the balance in the Allies' favor and overwhelming Germany and her allies. Building on the success of earlier Allied offensives in the summer of 1918, the Meuse-Argonne offensive opened on September 26th and carried on until peace negotiations began on November 8th with the arrival of a German delegation headed by Matthias Erzberger. Kaiser Wilhelm stepped down as the head of the German government on November 9th, and 2 days later the armistice was signed in a railroad car near Compiègne in a French forest near the front lines at 5:45 a.m. Fighting continued right up until 11 a.m., resulting in more than 2,000 additional deaths in the last day of the war alone. A year after the war had ended, King George V of Great Britain declared that November 11th would be marked henceforth as Armistice Day and celebrated with 2 minutes of silence at 11 a.m., the hour that the agreement went into effect. The armistice signing brought an end to a war that left 9 million soldiers dead and another 21 million wounded. Join us next time for another segment of This Week in Military History with the Pritzker Military Museum and Library.
In This Week in Military History, we explore Operation Chastise, a series of British aerial bombing attacks against German infrastructure targets during World War II. Barnes Wallis, a British engineer, began working on a bomb that would bounce or skip across bodies of water in 1942. He prototyped his idea by bouncing marbles in a tub in his backyard. Originally, he thought it could be used on battleships at anchor in port, but as plans for the weapon developed, the utility of using them on German dams that were vital to the industry became apparent. In testing the idea, British leaders discovered that the new bombs, codenamed Upkeep, needed to be dropped from a height of 60 feet. Lancaster bombers were modified to carry the drum-shaped bombs. Squadron 617 was created to fly the modified Lancasters, with Wing Commander Guy Gibson as its leader. In February 1943, the squadron began training in low-level night flying and navigation in preparation for the raid. The 19 Lancaster bombers, with 133 airmen, targeted the Möhne, Eder, and Zarpa dams on May 16, 1943, taking off in 3 waves. Wing Commander Gibson flew in the first wave, which bombed the Möhne. The second wave attacked the Eder Dam, which it breached. The third wave attacked the Zarpa Dam, which remained intact after the bombing. Of the 133 airmen who participated in the attack, 53 were killed. While the attack did not incapacitate German industry, it did serve as a morale boost to the British. Join us next time for another segment of This Week in Military History with the Pritzker Military Museum and Library.
In This Week in Military History, we explore the Battle of Fort Donelson, which took place in the Western Theater of the American Civil War in 1862. The battle was part of a series of battles meant to cut Confederate supply lines and stop river traffic in support of the Confederacy. At this point in the Civil War, General Ulysses S. Grant and other Union commanders realized that they needed to control the major rivers in the Western Theater to defeat the Confederacy. After capturing Fort Henry along the northern branch of the Tennessee River on February 6, 1862, Grant led the Tennessee Army to advance 12 miles cross-country to Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River to meet the Confederate forces that had withdrawn from Fort Henry. Meanwhile, Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston sent an additional 12,000 men under the command of Brigadier General John B. Floyd to Donelson as reinforcements. On the morning of February the 15th, the battle commenced as the Confederates attacked the right flank of Grant's forces. Union forces counterattacked that afternoon before Floyd ordered his men to retreat to the fort. As Confederate commanders decided upon their next move, Grant ordered counterattacks all along the lines, capturing much of the outer battlements by day's end. The Confederate forces were able to break out, but instead of retreating from the fort, they decided to pull into entrenchments. Grant continued to attack them and gain ground. The Confederates eventually escaped, but casualties were high. 2,000 Confederates were killed or wounded and another 11,000 captured. By contrast, Union casualties were 724 killed and 2,000 wounded. The Union victory and their ability to maintain control of the rivers, cutting off the Confederacy's supply lines, would eventually lead to the Union success at the Battle of Vicksburg. Join us next time for another segment of This Week in Military History with the Pritzker Military Museum and Library.